समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
US and Israel joint strikes on Iran have rendered the entire region on edge. A serious war is unfolding and changing the Middle East forever. The strikes that began today morning, announced by Israeli Defense Forces, did not land in vacuum. The US military buildup around Iran has been unprecedented already, and if you have been noticing my post on the X, I had argued that a second round of direct confrontation between Israel and Iran is just a matter of time. Operation Epic Fury, as Donald Trump has called it in his address, has landed in a region already cracking at the seams. Before I go ahead, let me reiterate that this indeed has become the era for war. Afghanistan and Pakistan are locked in open hostilities. Gulf rivalries have simmered beneath formal diplomacy. Airspaces across Middle East have been tightening under the weight of missile alerts. And just a day before the first missiles fell on Tehran, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi concluded a high-profile visit to Israel. Into this charged atmosphere, the Israel launched its first strikes across Iran around 8 a.m. local time today morning. Just minutes into it, the US joined the strikes. Among the first sites reportedly hit was the compound associated with Iran's 86-year-old supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei in downtown Tehran. Smoke rose over the capital. Whether he was present there remains unclear, and according to some reports, he was taken to an undisclosed location already. The symbolism, however, was unmistakable. None of this is a warning shot. It is an escalation into a war that is going to intensify, and it already has. Now, what I've done today is that I've broken down today's explainer in about 7-8 parts for you to grasp the gravity and complexity of this fast evolving situation. So let's begin. Part 1 is that let's look at the military buildup that preceded these strikes. The offensive followed weeks of visible American preparation. President Donald Trump had overseen a massive military buildup in the Middle East, deploying fighter jets, naval strike troops, and forward-positioned assets across the Gulf. Officially, the goal was leverage. Pressure Tehran into agreeing to a new deal, ending its nuclear program and ballistic missiles program. But in a video statement released hours ago, Trump declared the start of a major combat operation in Iran. He accused Tehran of continuing to advance its nuclear ambitions and of pursuing missile capabilities that could threaten the United States and its allies. He acknowledged American casualties were possible. That often happens in war, suggesting that this time around the scale could be much larger than the original 12-day war last year. Addressing the Iranian public directly, he urged them to take over your government once the strikes concluded. Now, that statement has sort of reframed the objectives of this particular strike. It has suggested that the objective is not just limited to degrading facilities and nuclear enrichment, it clearly mentions regime change itself. Let's come to the part 2. Does it mean that diplomatic route wasn't tried? Yes, it was, but it collapsed. The path to this moment ran through Muscat. Oman mediated talks between Washington and Tehran aimed at negotiating a new nuclear framework or a new deal. Iran and Washington, D.C. talked directly too, but those talks reportedly failed. Iran insists it has not enriched uranium since June last year, but it has blocked international inspectors from accessing sites that were bombed during a previous 12-day war. Satellite imagery analyzed by international media has shown some renewed activity at two of those locations, suggesting assessment work and possibly attempts to recover or reconstitute material. Now, for Washington and Tel Aviv, restricted inspections combined with resumed activity, all of this crossed a threshold that they always wanted to cross. The diplomatic track stalled, the military track accelerated. Now, let's come to part three. Iran is also prepared this time around and has already launched a swift counterstrike. Now, if June 2025 was marked by delayed retaliation, this time Iran responded immediately. Clearly, the regime knows it's now or never. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, launched what it called the first wave of drones and missiles towards Israel. Air raid sirens echoed nationwide as Israeli defenses have intercepted incoming projectiles. But the retaliation did not stop at Israel. Missiles have targeted the US Navy's Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. Explosions have also been heard in Qatar as well as in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi in UAE. Sirens and blasts have reported in Kuwait, home to US bases. Iraq, Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, all of these countries have shut their airspaces. Warning systems are activated across Jordan. Russian carriers and others have suspended flights to both Iran and Israel. India too has cancelled its flights into the region. Most of the important GCC players like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE have vowed to retaliate against Iranian strikes on their territory. The conflict has already spilled beyond bilateral exchanges. It is now regional and it is expanding. Iran's foreign ministry has issued a defiant statement declaring the country will not hesitate in its response and that the time had come to defend the homeland. The Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen have signaled their intent to resume attacks on Red Sea shipping routes and on Israel, threatening another artery of global trade. Now, this is, as you can see, no longer a single front. It is a web of fronts, and they will entwine and create a larger disruption. That brings me to part four, which is the China variable and the future of warfare. Hovering in the background is Beijing's invisible hand. There are persistent reports, though not validated system by system or through official channels, that China has supplied Iran during and after the earlier 12-day war and possibly again in this phase. Alleged assistance includes components for suicide drones, medium to long-range air defense systems such as the HQ-16 and HQ-17AE, anti-ship missiles like the C-802 and potentially the DF-17 mid-range platforms. There are also claims of chemical components relevant to weapons developments that have come from China. Now, even without full confirmation, because the confirmation will not come, it has been reiterated earlier that China has provided material backing to Tehran in previous escalations as well. More importantly, China is watching and China is learning. This confrontation is being studied as a live experiment in modern warfare, specifically the contest between airspace saturation tactics and legacy naval dominance. Drone swarms and missile volleys aimed at overwhelming layered defenses are being tested against American carrier groups, Gulf bases, and advanced interception systems. For Beijing, the lessons extend beyond Iran, if at all. They have implications for Taiwan, for the South China Sea, and for the future balance between precision fires and traditional maritime power projections. Iran may be fighting for survival, but China may be studying for strategy, while Russia, well, it has been able to not do much except sending some equipment to Iran and watching from afar. And that brings me to part five, which is what about Iran's capabilities and Iran's leverage? Iran officially maintains a self-imposed cap on its ballistic missile range at 2,000 kilometers. But even that envelope covers the entire Middle East and parts of Eastern Europe. There is no public evidence whatsoever of an operational intercontinental ballistic missile program, though Washington has long criticized Iran's space program as a potential stepping stone. Tehran's doctrine is layered and asymmetric. Ballistic missiles, drone swarms, proxy militias, anti-ship systems, and naval disruption tactics form a deterrence architecture designed not to match the US power symmetrically, but to complicate it. Which brings the conversation inevitably to the Strait of Hormuz, and this is part 6. What about the world's energy tripwire? Roughly a fifth of global oil passes through the narrow waters of Hormuz. It is Iran's most potent strategic lever. If escalation moves vertically, Tehran has options: naval mines, fast track boats, C-802 anti ship missiles, drone strikes on tankers, swarm tactics against US naval assets. Even if Iran doesn't close the Strait of Hormuz formally, for it will require the Omanis to be on board as well, the threat of disruption can rattle energy markets. But closure is also going to be a double edged sword. It would almost certainly invite overwhelming American retaliation and risk alienating major oil importers such as China itself. For now, Tehran appears to be escalating horizontally, which means across bases and proxies rather than sealing the strait per se. The question is how long that restraint holds. And by the way, just a quick look at oil prices will tell you that they have been going up, and all the speculation around these attacks will make them go further up. And part 7, finally, let's also look at the internal aspect, which is whether are we going to see consolidation in Iran or further fragmentation. The domestic variable complicates everything. Since December 2025, Iran has witnessed intense protests that were met with brutal repression, reportedly leaving thousands of people dead. Anger towards the regime actually runs quite deep today. In some areas, reports suggest local Iranians have reached to the strikes with visible celebration. In fact, you may have seen all these clips all over social media, a sign that resentment towards theocracy may outweigh immediate nationalist reflexes. In the current context, it is unlikely that Operation Epic Fury and Roaring Lion, as Israel calls it, can unify a population behind the Ayatollahs. It can actually accelerate internal fracture. And Trump's direct appeal to Iranians to take over your government is a gamble on the latter. Iran's crown prince, Shah Reza Pahlavi, has been making appeals after appeals to the Iranian people to end the regime. And before I end, let me just discuss briefly about the factor of India that is sort of caught in the cross currents. Now, India, that recently concluded a visit to Israel just as this crisis erupted, the optics are rather unmissable. New Delhi has steadily deepened its strategic embrace of Israel, particularly in defense and technology. At the same time, it maintains significant interests in Iran and across the Gulf, including energy flows. Now, India is certainly not a combatant in this confrontation, but it is not insulated from its consequences either. The war may be centered on Iran, but the aftershocks will not be. What happens in Hormuz is going to affect global markets. What Beijing learns will shape future battlefields. Whether Iran hardens or fractures will determine whether this remains a punitive strike cycle or becomes a systemic unraveling of regional order. The missiles have already flown. The real question is whether this is the climax or merely the opening act. I'll be back to discuss more on this fast evolving and very dangerous era of war. Stay tuned.